Hi, everybody. Long before the mythos of Rabbi Jesus was told or written down, there were at least 25 identical stories about sons of one God or another who were crucified and resurrected. So the rational spiritual seeker must come to terms with the conclusion that, that these tales have a specific message and a specific purpose. And we're going to talk about that on today's program when we come back. Alchemy. And we are back. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. John Michael Salvato. If you are just tuning in for the very first time, we welcome you to our broadcast. Inner Alchemy is a program that we try to put out a couple times every week. And so if you find value in what we're sharing, we encourage you to like and share, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. But most importantly, we encourage you to ask questions or make comments, and we'll go ahead and pull up the comment section. So I generally forget to do that. So let's go ahead and dive in. Today, our Christian friends around the world are celebrating or observing the Good Friday experience. And as a secular humanist, I don't interpret any of the stories of the gods or goddesses or their retinues as being literal stories, or being intended to be literally interpreted. But I do find myself compelled to look for the deeper message, the hidden meaning. And as a self-described mystagogue, I try to look for that opportunity for personal gnosis in the tale itself. And so for me, the meaning of Good Friday is a story that's powerful, that has many layers, and so I wanted to really unpack some of those layers of meaning within the interpretation that comes to me, with a desire that this interpretation might help somebody on their journey. Now, if you happen to be somebody who interprets that story as being literal and you believe that it was a historic account, I'm not here to argue with you or to debate that with you. I just want to try and offer a perspective that may or may not be helpful for you on your personal journey. And if it's not, then you can always just move on or close this window, stop listening. Excuse me. But for those who are sincere seekers, who are always looking for an opportunity to find a perspective that they may not have considered before, it's been my custom to begin and end my days with meditation, and then to spend about an hour each day in what we call Lectio et Divino. This is a period of spiritual reading, seeking insight, and sort of getting in touch with that inner wisdom. And so this morning, there was nothing that could jump out more powerfully to me, even though I was reading a Zoroastrian text. But this is what jumped out to me, and it kept nagging at me until I decided to do this video. And it's the deeper meaning, I think, for us all. You see, I believe that right now, wholeheartedly, most of us I think at any time, most of us have spent our lives seeking to live a fuller, richer, and more vibrant life. But those of us on a spiritual path have more of a desire to cultivate an open and compassionate heart. And right now, I think that it's really present for all of us that life can be painful, with nothing more painful than losing a loved one, especially in a way that feels sudden or unfair or too soon or unjust and violent. And in my life, I've experienced that multiple times. I've experienced that with the suicide of a loved one when I was 16. I experienced that with a sudden car accident of two loved ones when I was 16 also. I experienced that when I was raped, and I experienced that in the AIDS pandemic, where we lost so many too soon. And so this is very personal for me. And Pema Chodron, the brilliant Buddhist teacher, former nun, tells us that the only way to avoid suffering is to allow ourselves to move through the experience, through the pain. My own root teacher, Majaya Sati Bhagavati, would tell us that only by allowing the heart to remain vulnerable, peeling away layer after layer of hurt, do we get to the place where we realize there are no throwaway people. We get to the place that we realize that, as Neem Karoli Baba said, that we should feed everyone. And so we look at the story of the crucifixion from two perspectives, as I see it. That's the perspective of the beloved disciples, his mother, his lovers, and the perspective of the great rabbi himself. So from the perspective of the disciples, hey, Greg, from the perspective of the disciples, this phone always rings in the middle of the broadcast. We can now, some of you that are watching may indeed consider yourself to be counted among the disciples of Rabbi Jesus. So from that perspective, we can easily imagine how seeing him broken and bleeding on a stake would cause us to have a broken heart, to be pained in unimaginable ways. Losing someone you love is painful enough, but shit, seeing the murder before your eyes, that's a level of trauma that I don't think can compare to much else. And from the perspective of Rabbi Jesus, we can imagine the feeling of betrayal, the feelings of the abuse and hatred he must have felt, surely experienced, as his body endured torture and a slow, painful death by asphyxiation. That experience must have been beyond comprehension as well. But in both cases, in this mythos, there was pain. Physical pain, emotional pain, trauma, fear. And I think the story tells us that if we're going to experience the triumph over suffering, the greatest suffering, of course, being death, if we're going to experience that resurrection moment, then we have to move through the pain. See, the compassionate heart is always born out of a broken heart. Deep compassion comes from the experience of having known deep pain. and sometimes that pain evolves or is born out of seeing the suffering of others, as Francesco di Verdone, Francis of Assisi, felt when he saw the suffering of the lepers that he and his Franciscan brothers care for. So sometimes compassion is born out of seeing the pain in others. Other times it comes from a deep personal experience of pain, of suffering and trauma. So we find ourselves in an opportunity here, whether we accept this story as a literal story or a mythos or a combination of both. We often refer to the suffering of Rabbi Jesus as the passion of the Christ, the passion of the Anointed One, a tale of remarkable self-sacrifice and compassion. And yeah, we know that compassion shares the same root as passion. Literally, compassion means with passion. But how many of us realize that another word shares the same root as patience, and that other word, same root as passion, and that word is patience. Both patience and passion come from the Latin root word meaning to endure. And so we come back to the lesson, I think, for all of us in the mythos of the crucifixion, and that is to recognize that suffering is only caused by trying to avoid pain. Pain is unavoidable. Suffering is optional. Suffering is a choice. And so while we can't escape the pain of seeing so many people suffering, struggling to breathe, dying with COVID-19 or underlying conditions, we can't escape the pain that comes from knowing someone who might lose their home or be unable to feed their kids due to the secondary impact of this pandemic. We can't escape the heartbreak of seeing people lowered into mass graves off the coast of the Bronx or in Iran. But we can avoid suffering by patiently enduring and sitting with that pain. And it's uncomfortable and it sucks. But as we sit with it, we know that the only way out of pain is to move through it. And then we too experience our time in the underworld, where we learn to embrace the shadow, as I said last night, where we emerge from the tombs of our own making, renewed, restored, and reborn into our power, and one of Richard Levy's favorite terms that I use quite often, into our sovereignty. So whatever your spiritual tradition, whatever your path, whether you observe or recognize Good Friday, or you're in the midst of struggling to find a way to celebrate Pesach this year, as we all hope that the angel of death pass over our house, my wish for you is that you find that peace within, that comfort within, that compassion that reminds us that the only way to avoid suffering is to move through the pain. And we will move through it. We will survive. We will lose a lot of people in the process. And that'll hurt. And that'll rip our hearts wide open. I know mine is already. But I fear that we've just begun to experience that part of this journey. But remember that ripping open of the heart exposes us to the ability to lower ourselves into that tomb of our own making, where we can experience the wisdom and the hidden gnosis of the underworld and emerge stronger than ever before. Emerge triumphant, to be reborn, resurrected. And so I wish you a peaceful and happy weekend. I'll probably not be back with you guys until Sunday, when I share a video that many of you have already seen before about the hidden message and of the mystagogy of the story of the resurrection. And I'll be meanwhile holding space for each and every one of you, especially those who have suffered personal loss. Know that I love you. Know that I will be holding you in my hearts, and stay in the moment. Be grateful for everything that you've got, and always remember, even through the darkest times, the best is yet to come. We'll talk to you soon. Namaste.